Well, hello, I'm alone in Finland, this is EVE Online, and some generic footage in the background, and we're going to be talking about some stuff today. Somebody made me aware in the comments that CCP is being sold off again. I hadn't actually seen this news at the point where the last video went out, so apologies for the several people that clicked on that video expecting it to be about that. Understandable, but no, I hadn't seen it yet. But I have seen it now, so I wanted to go through a few things, and I wanted to talk about some of the stuff around about that, correcting some of the sort of things that I see an awful lot of in the comments, the common sort of questions, and giving some examples of the general situation when it comes to companies like this. So the first thing out of all, I keep seeing this, people keep making this comment, EVE is dying, this is a video about EVE dying and all of that shit. I don't think that. I haven't thought that, and I've sort of dismissed this back in 2007, back in 2011, back in 2014, and all of the different things that I've sort of gone through, being on forums, being on YouTube the sort of first time round and things like this. This is not something that I've ever thought, and even now with everything I'm about to talk about, I still don't think this can kill EVE. And there's a few reasons that I'll get into, but that's something that you hear from a lot of people that just don't understand the situation. Do I think that EVE has a problem? Yes, absolutely. And it is visibly shrinking. You can see if you go onto EveMon and things like that, that the player base over the past, well, since 2016, I think, has basically been deteriorating year on year. The amount of players that play it have left. There are specific reasons, and you can see specific events in the news that tie to massive player drops. And this is something that continues going. Now, with that being said, the amount of money that CCP is generating from EVE is actually up year on year. And this is something that you can actually see when you have a look at the financial records on the Reykjavik government website, on the Icelandic government website, because those things are actually open for people to see, which we'll actually come back to in a little bit, because it's something that's kind of been falsely reported, and I think I know why. But first, I want to give a couple of examples, and I want to answer a few things. This will be a longer video. Now, the first thing about RuneScape. Essentially, the situation with RuneScape, as far as I understand it, and I'm going to link a video from Bella News down below that explains the whole thing, and the reason I'm kind of skitting over it is because I don't want to cover their content. I read about it in a news thing, their video was far more informative, and I think it's a very good example. So first link down below is his video on what's going on with RuneScape. But the TLDR about it is the developers of RuneScape have noticed the same thing that is essentially happening in EVE, this is why I was talking about it, where their player base is shrinking but they are making more money. And part of the reason for that is aggressive monetization. The same thing that's happening in EVE, where they are pushing Plex and pushing the gambling mechanics and things like this. People are putting more money into the game, but it's less people doing that. So they're not making as much on subscriptions as they are on Plex. And that's a key thing, because this is something that comes back to how companies, investment companies, work. Now, if you're not aware, you can have a company that's owned by one person, you can have a company that's owned by another company, or a fund or something like that, where the point of it is long-term growth. So they don't really mess with the underneath company, they just invest in something that they think will do well, and they wait for it. But then, separate to that, you have investment companies, and the entire point of them is to buy something, a company, and to get that company more profitable in a short term or a fixed term. It could be 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. I've seen different deals like this, and I've worked for several of these companies with those strategies that have failed fantastically, or where the product that they bought has failed. And I've been in those companies when they have gone bust, when people weren't listening because they didn't care. They don't care what your concern is for how the business is in 15 years if they're not going to own it in 10 years. And that's kind of a problem. So I want to give a couple of examples that are more severe, but sort of give a good example of this. And the best one that I can think of, or the best two that I can think of, the first one is the NHS in Britain. So the NHS is a government-owned thing. The whole point of it is it's the National Health Service. Its main point is to provide you with healthcare. You go in and you're ill, it gives you healthcare. If you transfer that to America and look at the American healthcare system, if you go into a hospital, that hospital's primary responsibility is not to give you healthcare. It is to turn a profit. Now, They don't turn profits, and that's a tax reason, because they try and write off as much as possible so they pay as little tax as possible. But the whole point of the business is that it's a business. They need to make money for their shareholders. The more money they can make by bilking insurance companies, or by bilking the actual government for money, or by writing stuff off to tax, that's a good thing for them. That's part of the problem with that system. Another example from the British government is British Rail. For those of you that don't know, Britain used to have nationalised rail service, and under the John Major Tory government in the 90s, they decided to sell it, and they did this against everybody's sort of will. Most of the Tories didn't want them to do this. Margaret Thatcher thought it was a bad idea, and if she's calling it a bad idea when she's essentially Satan incarnate, you know that it's not a good idea. But they sold off the entire British rail network, with the exception of the actual railways underneath it, to private investment companies. And the reason was, it's costing us $2 million a year, and if other companies own it, they will be able to run it better because they know better, they know how to make money. And they do, and they did. The year after it was sold, it cost the British taxpayer $4 billion a year, literally doubled in a year. The majority of sales of shares of British Rail went to the French and German governments, because they were aware that that's something that makes money, so they bought it. The companies make money off the people, they make money off of the government, they make money because that's their prerogative. They're not running a rail service, they're just owning a company that happens to run on it. And that's kind of a key thing, because that's a good example of investment companies. They need to make money. They don't care about the product primarily. The point is to make money. Now, the reason I'm going through all of this is because EVE Online is owned by another company. It's owned by a company called Pearl Abyss. If you don't know Pearl Abyss, they are the company that owns Black Desert Online, and they were the company that was sort of created by some of the developers of Black Desert Online. If you don't know that game, it's essentially a massive multiplayer game where the vast majority of players leave their computers on all day fishing to do something in the game. They AFK their players, they make some money, and then they go and play content in the evenings. It makes a whole load of money in microtransactions above anything else. It's sort of free to play normally, but it is just a massive time sink for the vast amount of people, with a little bit of combat in it and not much else. Now, the reason I said earlier about there being some inconsistencies is because when it comes to the EVE situation, when EVE was originally bought over, I think it was 7 years ago, they were bought over for a figure that at the time was advertised for about 450 million euros. Now, when I'm reading all of the stuff today, and so far there is only one news article that is about this application, and everyone else is quoting that. It is MTN, a Korean financial magazine, and they are saying that the original purchase of CCP was a share price purchase, but they're saying that 220 million US dollars was spent, which at the time was sort of equivalent to 225 million euros ish. Now, some of the articles that are quoting that article are also changing the figures, so I don't exactly know what that figure was, but what I do know is the current rumoured figure for CCP being sold off, and that is 125 million. Now, I specifically say that's rumoured because I can't find that anywhere. There's a whole load of articles that are quoting different figures, but none of them seem to have any sort of concrete details on the figure. And the MTN article doesn't state a sale figure. Now, one of the other things that's sort of skimmed over on most of these articles is the fact that the acquisition of CCP was actually a share acquisition. Now, I didn't think that it was publicly owned, and there's some sort of lack of information on this online, but essentially it would mean that they own most of the shares, so they own a significant chunk of the company, but they don't actually have any sway with what's going on. However, again, MTN is reporting that the main problem that's going on is that CCP isn't generating any money. Now, that is sort of contradictory to what the finances show in Iceland, so it might not be that they're not generating money, it might be that they're not kicking money up because they're not paying out to shareholders. Again, I'm not sure about that, I'm just sort of reading between the lines of a whole load of contradictory information, but that's the best that I can find. I should also note on this that one of the articles that's the most popular online, because you can't find the MTN article on Google. It's very difficult to get hold of. However, one of the major articles that's being read at the moment is Rock Paper Shotgun. Now, Rock Paper Shotgun, in my opinion, has a massive problem because it never links any of the stuff it's saying unless it's internal to itself. It doesn't link external sources for a lot of its stuff, which is funny because it directly mentions this article, but it doesn't link it. And that can be problematic, especially when there are some things in the MTN article that contradict Rock Paper Shotgun, but they're kind of not essential for this point. So, the other thing that is known is that this information has come out right as EVE Frontier has been launched. Now, as I've stated before, I think EVE Frontier is a massive problem because of the fact that its main sort of player base is essentially hardcore EVE players. So you're selling something to your own player base, wanting them to play another version. So you're not increasing subscribers, you're transferring subscribers. That's a weird idea. However, second to that, we have also had the fact that EVE Online is developing a solo shooter, or a multiplayer shooter. And in my opinion, it's not going well, because while it doesn't look great, it seems functional, they seem to miss the point of a shooter, because one of the core mechanics is the sort of build or missioning mechanics, which takes you out of the shooter aspect of the game for quite a bit of time. So if you're playing that solo, you're essentially vulnerable for a whole load of time while you're trying to complete these things. So it's rolling a dice. And the more you get killed in a shooter, the more you get annoyed with a shooter. And for people that are sort of adrenaline seeking for these things, it's a massive put off. A couple of my friends tested it with us, and they were just sat there going, nah, this is just horseshit. And they just wanted to go back to COD, which is kind of the people they are. I'm not a particular COD junkie, I actually don't have any of the new ones. But the reason I was playing with them specifically, I got them to give it a try, was because I was curious about that. They do have EVE accounts, but they are people that are Plex in and PvP hard. Now, on top of this, there's a little bit of a problem with sort of perception of EVE as well. Now, this is an example that can be seen in the comments of my videos. You get every video, you will get people commenting about their dislike for EVE because of EVE practices. Now, some of those I don't agree with, but some of them I think are particularly accurate. There is a sort of problem within not just the game or the culture or the developers, but it's a problem in perception, and it's a problem that isn't being addressed. So if you have somebody with a negative opinion and they put out that negative opinion, a lot of people that read it will pick that opinion up as just sort of osmosis. It's kind of how a lot of sort of stereotypes and sort of racism and things like that progress through a group of people, because you hear something negative and that sort of sits in your head as the fact. If you don't know anything else about it, you pick up the first thing that you assume. It's why Al Murray's stand-up is a particularly good one, where he says, give us your one-word stereotype of a group of people, and he starts shouting out country names. And the audience together almost unifiedly shouts out the same words for particular countries. But those audience members, for the vast majority of countries, don't have secondary experience of those countries or primary experience of those countries. So it's just something that's been picked up the way that people do. So that is a bit of a problem, and a culture shift thing is something that builds against you, especially with the likes of Pirate Software putting out a very popular video that was particularly negative of EVE. Now, I think his video, while I wouldn't say that it was inaccurate, the way that some people have tried to pass off videos where they went out and said, this was all wrong and I was wrong in the first place, and then they provided no evidence whatsoever for any other statements, aside from the ones that actually agreed with the guy. And I am aware a lot of people will hear that name and not be particularly happy at the moment. I'm up there with you, but I just don't want to put out that kind of negativity unless it's warranted, like with evidence, and I don't know the guy. But with that being said, that is a shadow that is cast over everything else that CCP does, because they keep putting EVE next to the other games. They're developing games in the same universe, which is fair play. But when people say EVE Online Frontier, they assume it's the same game. So if they don't like it, they're not going to check it out. If they do check it out, they're going to be met with instant grind. if they check out EVE Online, they're going to be immediately hit with that. Oh, you can buy Omega Time and get a better account right away, and you will train at double the speed and all of this stuff, but you only have 14 days to do this, so make sure you do it quickly. Sorry, 14 hours. And then it goes up to 14 days, and then it might go up again, and then those things come around, and you will see the Plex sales and the account sales, and you'll see all of these sales that crop up every 2 to 3 months. So if you're selling that much stuff on sale every couple of months, why not just make that the price? It's because you're using fear of missing out. And the problem is that a lot of people are educated on this now, especially young children, because it's actually going into schools. I know teachers in Britain and Finland and Sweden that teach kids about this at a primary school level. So when people see that a company is using a manipulative tactic, what do? They ignore it. It's the reason why Pinterest has almost nobody watching it now, because all it is full of ads that use fear of missing out, or quick, use this coupon for this sale for 12 hours, and then 2 days later you see the same advert and a few days later, and all of that jazz. It's just this repeated fear of missing out, and people are becoming immune to it, and it's what killed off the advertising industry for the masses essentially, because we have become immune to this. So when you're crowbarring this crap into your games, people are obviously going to see that as the tactic, but also that is representing your company. So if the tactic isn't above board, isn't nice, then what's the opinion of the company? Now, jumping back onto the last of the EVE situation, when it comes to the MTN report, a lot of the things that are being put forward about this is stuff that I've covered on this channel before, where CCP has made a phenomenal list of decisions and products that just were not well executed. They did EVE Echoes, which was supposed to be this secondary thing where you could just log into your client and do a few things in your client, change whatever you wanted to do, etc. And it wasn't well put forward, and the player base didn't take it up. However, it looks like it was something that was intended to be monetized. They did what were the other ones that they did? They originally did Dust, where they made the horrible decision of making it a PlayStation exclusive. Now again, that might have been some short-term money coming in from a PlayStation exclusive, but at the end of the day, you took a PC game and made something that you were advertising as alongside the PC game and shoved it onto a console. So you're immediately excluding a whole load of your player base, because, well, I hate to use the term, but the PC master race uses PCs for a reason. Some of us have got PlayStations as well, but most of the people that are affluent enough to have a gaming rig like you wouldn't believe and a PlayStation secondary to it, usually have kids that reside in the room where the PlayStation is, so you ain't going to get peace and quiet doing that, or the kids are going to be on the thing. So it's one of those things, it was never a good idea, and it was called out at the time. And one of the phrases that sticks in my head, because it was something that was said while the devs were mentioning these things, was that the player base didn't understand how these things work. Except the player base clearly did understand, because the game imploded on launch. And now, fairly recently, within the past couple of months, the devs have been on a live stream where they're explaining things, and that same mentality came out again. That same phrase came out again. Well, the players just don't understand because we know more about the situation than them. Well, that strikes as two things. Number one, be transparent in what you're putting in, and the fact that as I'm listing these off of my fingers, a middle finger has gone up for number one instead of an index finger kind of sums up my feelings on it. But number two, disregarding somebody's opinion on something without evidence, that is arrogant as hell. You don't know that somebody's wrong because in a group of people, like a fan base, you don't know everybody's experience, whether they've got less, whether they've got more, whether they've worked for, in my case, 3 companies that have gone massively bust because they didn't listen to the main people the companies were targeted at. Whether you've got software developers, whether you've got AI developers, whether you've got people with phenomenal sort of polymath versions of study, where they know a whole load about a whole load of different industries. So that sort of disregarding something out of hand and getting a chuckle from the other developers around about you is a very bad thing. Now, That was something that I witnessed, but I also witnessed the chat next to it, which was going mental at that same comment. And I would advise anybody that sees that particular VOD to look at the timed chat and how that comment was well received or not. But on top of this, we have had a whole load of problems. But EVE being sold off isn't a particularly bad thing. Even if it's being sold off at half the price that BDO sort of paid for it, or Pearl Abyss, however you want to list the companies, it might be sold off at half the price, but at the same time, that could just be the case of they're hemorrhaging money somewhere else. We don't know that because they won't divulge sort of finances of the internal stuff, and understandably so. They're trying to sell something. If it was bad, they don't want to say that. If other things are a problem, they don't want to mess with their own investors, because Pearl Abyss, although it's primarily owned by one of the developers, there is other shareholders in there, so you don't want to scare them too much. You want to try and keep that stuff more internal to maintain value. Now, as of time of sort of speaking this, there has been an underwriter selected for the sale of CCP, so it does look like it's going through. But again, this is all rumour, and it's all from one source, regardless of the fact that you've got articles on. I can find sort of 3 articles in the English-speaking world, but they all reference the same Korean article, so it's one point. We don't know the exact facts or how accurate that particular article is. So we'll see what happens. But reiterating, this doesn't mean that CCP's gone or CCP's dead or any of that stuff. CCP's a multi-million-dollar company. They will be able to weather anything that sort of kicks out for the foreseeable future, and they will last because they have a dedicated sort of fan base that puts more and more money year on year into their game. Even though that fan base is shrinking, they're still turning a profit. Now, my concern, and the concern with a lot of my videos, is the fact that they are focusing on this sort of evaboos in that fan base. They are focusing on the extreme fanatics within their fan base, at the expense of, like, for instance, the solo players, because you see a lot of comments in my comments about this, and it's something I talk about, but also at the expense of incoming players. These sort of token attempts that they've made to bring incoming players were particularly bad. The introduction, the playthrough, the what do you call it, the tutorial that they made was 2 hours long. Jesus, I've played through this thing about 20 times now with different accounts to see different sort of versions of it, and oh my god, I'll never get that time back in my life. Also, the fact that they put in the bare minimum of vocalization. Here's a simple idea: get some of the community who have particularly good microphone to read some of the vocalization for the tutorial, for missions, for things where you get text up on the screen. You could put it as a fan base thing. You could sign agreements to get that stuff in for free. I know tons of people that'd be willing to do it, and you could get some really funny accents for it and put that into the game. It would be a nice, easy way of open sourcing it and something to bring the community together a bit. But with that being said, I don't think that any of this is an end to EVE or particularly bad for it in the short term. My concern is getting more people in it for the long term. The bigger a game is, the better it is, plain and simple. And while I quite like the sort of quiet southern areas at the moment, I still also would like to see more players in the game, especially sort of newer mentalities, younger mentalities, and less of that sort of toxic clan mentality that brings players into corporations as slaves, essentially, instead of bringing people in to play together and to talk together. And some of the experiences I had, I'd say earlier in the game, but I mean, like, even 5 years ago, going through 20 years ago, it was some of the reasons I liked the game in the first place was the community. Now, with that being said, I'm going to sort of jump through a couple of things that come up in the comments constantly and sort of flesh out an opinion on a few of them. I've mentioned most of this stuff a few times, but it comes up an awful lot. You see the same comments from different people, and I can understand why. It's a commonly shared opinion, or a lot of them are, but I wanted to sort of go through them. So the first things first, multiboxing. Now, multiboxing is inherent in the EVE ecosystem. You have to understand, if you're not from EVE or you're a new player to EVE, that people playing with multiple clients has been something since the very beginning. It was an idea that CCP had back in the days where the game was subscription only, just to allow a lot of people in, where they had to pay for every account. Somebody yesterday left a comment that back in the old days in 2003 I used to have 30 accounts, and I'm sat there going, Jesus Christ. That means that in 2003 through 2007, this person was paying 420 quid a month in subscription to an online game. And while I had multiple accounts because I was part of Cap Swarm and things like that, still it never went to that extreme. And I am aware it exists, but it's not something that I think is a good thing. It's something that people can do, but it's also problematic. And I think activities that limit the ability of that are something that should be looked at. Or specifically like allowing single players to compete. So mining bonuses for individual ships or locations for mining where only solos or small groups can enter. Things like that that would allow sort of equal footing, so that if you're against somebody that is a single person with 30 accounts that now generate so much money they never have to pay for the game, then that doesn't give them a massive advantage. Because at the end of the day, why should I pay for a game when 30 people, well, when one person with 30 accounts doesn't have to? And that is an opinion that I see echoed an awful lot, is that people don't particularly like the multiboxing because of that. It's also a reason why Poshfin is so difficult. As I said the other day, something that I witnessed literally within this week was I warped into a site in Poshfin and there was 5 separate groups of multiboxing ships. So there was essentially 5 people controlling 5 fleets. They were all Vargars, the Marauder, Minmatar Marauder ship. And they weren't exactly fighting against each other. They were far enough away that they couldn't hit each other, but they started mouthing off in the chat. And I was just looking at this going, this has got to be one of the dumbest things that I've ever seen. These people complaining about a site, but also the fact that it's just 5 people and on grid there's several hundred ships. That's just mental to me, the fact that that's a thing. I can understand how that can generate money because people have that money, and if they want to spend it, then fair play. But it's also, when it comes back to the appearance of the game, if you get wimped by somebody like that when you are in low sec, one person flying 10 ships that's just insta-popped you in a gank, that's going to put you off the game. So those are things that I think, while I agree that they should continue to be there because you'll lose people that put money into the game if you don't, at the same time I think they need to be limited in some way. I don't know how, but I do know that people dislike it actively. And again, if you don't believe me, read down the comments. But with that being said, the other thing that I sort of touched on there is Omega bad? No. Omega's the thing, and this is a problem with the disconnect that players have, not the devs. Players expect something for free because there's been so many games that go out there that seem to be free, except they're not. The reason that Fortnite was free to play was to get people playing it so that the money hooks could go in, the advertisement, the stuff that would make young people or susceptible people, because it's sort of targeted towards people with certain neuroatypical conditions, to spend money. They weren't free, it was a lure. And you need to understand that that's a different thing. The reason that EVE has an alpha is because it's a demo. It's not the same as it's a free-to-play game where there's a higher tier. The higher tier existed. The Omega existed far before the free tier. This wasn't a game that started free-to-play to get you to spend money. This is a game that requires payment because of the services that are there. The cloud computing that runs behind it, the server cluster that runs everything, needs financing. Now at the same time, I would argue that that financing is starting to take the piss with how much money they are actually generating, so they should lower it, especially when it comes to the fear of missing out advertising. But I don't think that game should be free, and I don't think if you see a game that's free, you should play it, because it never is free. You don't get anything for free. If it looks free, they're taking something from you. If it's Facebook, they're taking your information. If it's Instagram, they're taking your information. If you're using Google, they're collecting your information. But it's not free. And that is a big problem with society in general at the moment. You see it when people talk about creating things, things that are on YouTube when they're making stuff. You'll see some maker making something and saying, well, this cost me 49 quid. And you're looking at this table made out of aged oak that costs £600 in materials alone. they got it for free because they were lucky. So they're saying, well, it costs. No, it doesn't. You got something luckily. But you are also forgetting that it takes time to make, and you're not attributing something to your time. That's the same problem with free-to-play games. You are looking at them and going, well, this should be free. Okay, well then why don't you make the game for free? Oh wait, you want paid for your time? Yes, you want paid for your time, because the time spent making the thing costs money. The server clusters cost money. It isn't free. Now, having a demo that allows you to play it early on and then possibly subscribing to a bit more things, I think that's a good thing. It's something that was not well implemented in the beginning, and it cost them a lot of players, but they've sort of learned from that point. But still to say, well, I would never pay for this, then why the hell are you playing it in the first place? If you think it's that bad, you shouldn't be playing it. At the same time, if you have the audacity to ask for money from your work, then why are you demanding somebody else do work for free? That's the argument. That's the other side of it. Now, with that, let's get into skill injectors, because a lot of people comment, skill injectors are horrible for the game. I don't agree with that. And here's why. If you have played the game for a while, you've paid your subscription month on month. Your skills have increased with that subscription. Skill injectors are just a fast way to increase your skills, but you're still putting something in for the time played. If you take skill injectors out, well, then you've got people that can advance faster that won't, and they'll get annoyed at that. But at the same time, the people at the same skill level have sort of put in the same amount of money in a roundabout way. Maybe it's come through Plex and there's been transfers, but essentially the higher skilled you are in game, the more money you've paid into CCP, and I don't exactly disagree with that. What I do find particularly annoying is that nobody knows that. So you could see a pilot that's 3 years old have an estimated skill level because of that age, and then because of that you decide as somebody with a lot more skills to attack that person because it would be an easy kill in PvP, and all of a sudden they are fully skilled because they've bought the 2,000 skill injectors that are required to get everything. So you've got absolutely wimped. That's what the age and the corporation list of the game used to be. It used to be that signalling of the age of the player. It used to allow you to go, oh Jesus, that guy's been playing for a while, I'm not touching him. So I think that skill points should be something that is visible to other people to inform them of decisions. That's just something in my opinion, but I don't think skill injectors are inherently bad, because at the end of the day they're a revenue stream for something that's good in the game, and it's the exact same as paying for the servers. You're paying for time, so I don't entirely disagree with that. It does annoy me that skill injectors can be traded on the market for in-game currency, because then you can start getting people who, again, are living free within the game and they are not paying anything in. They are using other whales to spend that money for them. And those other whales might become disillusioned because they're not getting the same sort of bang for the buck and stuff like that. So I think that skill injectors shouldn't be tradable in-game, but at the moment they are. And I wouldn't sort of die on that hill of saying, I would quit unless this. No, it's something that's there. I don't like that they're tradable, but it's something. You're not going to like everything about every game, so that's something that's there. That's my opinion. And when it comes to Skinner and things like that, I think that they're actually quite cool. I like being able to paint my ship the own way. I think they're far too bloody expensive. So for me, it is once a month I get 5 Plex from doing the little upkeeps, so every sort of 6 months I can get a skin for one of my ships. I think that's fair play. I would argue that it should be half the price, maybe a bit cheaper, but that's my only argument, and that's the same argument I have about a lot of stuff in EVE. Reduce the pricing, you'll get more people in. Spending 25 Plex, 30 Plex, 60 Plex to colour one of your ships, when you translate it to real world money, you start going, that's taking a piss. So that's something that should be sorted. But at the same time, the Plex, because of new laws that are coming in the EU, that might actually be something where they have to put a financial value next to it. So people will start to see, you're spending that amount of Plex, therefore you're spending this amount of dollars or euros or pounds. And that will make a massive shift in what people are spending in-game. So That's something that I think's coming, and I think personally Eve should get ahead of it because they'd look like the good guys. Then there was a comment that keeps coming up when people talk about competing with old players. How do I come in? I should start with more skill points. I should start with this. I should get more free stuff as I'm starting. No, because the argument against that, which I've also seen other people repeat, is the plain simple. If you start being able to fly battle cruisers, you're going to fly battle cruisers because people come in with that mentality of I want the biggest, best thing. And if you fly battle cruisers as your first ship, you're going to lose those battle cruisers. You can actually scale up to a battle cruiser in the first day if you use the, the 1 million free skill points. Again, links down in the doobly-doo. But using that, there are many other people that do the same thing. You can get 1 million free skill points as you start. And that's a way to scale you up to battle cruisers, or even battleships, I think. But the supporting skills are a bit lacking. The reason for it to start at the small ships, is because you are perfectly capable of taking them into PvP. And if you watch some of the more rich Eve players, you'll notice that when they PvP, if it's not in a fleet, if it's solo, they use frigates and cruisers. Because that's where some of the best PvP is. Mainly because there's less risk. When you lose it, you lose a frigate. You lose it maximum 100 mil. So, usually, like 10 to 15 mil. So you've lost something that doesn't cost much to replace. If you're doing level 4 missions, one of the bigger missions will get you 2 frigates that you can sort of burn out. So it's a way to sort of have a bit of content in the game, have a bit of PvP in the game. If you're somebody that buys Plex, one Plex can set you up 100 ships for PvP, so you could be sorted for an entire month. So that's something where it's a little bit of... It's a weird opinion, and I can understand why people have that opinion, because they want more. And that's, well, the YouTube problem. We see what other people have and we want it. I mean, I would absolutely kill for all of the machinery that this old Tony has in his workshop, and if you haven't checked out his videos, go and have a look. They're fantastic. But I'd love all of that machinery. I just don't have the money to spend on that kind of Bridgeport milling machine and lathe and all of that jazz, because it takes time to build it up, and I do have stuff that is different to there. So you should always start with the small stuff, learn and build your way up. If you do know this old Tony, you might know that he actually started on a little tiny mini lathe as his first project, and he built it up over the years, because starting small teaches you the fundamentals. The person who would jump to the biggest ship is also the person that would lose that ship in a hurry. And that is the fastest way to get pissed off. If you spend an entire sort of Plex buy, if you go for one of the deals of like 500, and you spend that on the biggest, shiniest ship on day one, you're going to lose that ship without fail. Most probably in high sec where you think you're secure. And then you're going to be so pissed off that you've just put 20 quid down the drain and got nothing after a day. You're never going to play the game again. So it's kind of insurance against that happening as well. Because we have all seen it. Almost all of the players in Eve that have been playing it for more than like 3 months have seen somebody lose something massive and lose their shit about it. I didn't play the game for 2 weeks after I lost my first carrier, because where I was entirely safe according to everybody else, and then all of a sudden a signal went up and everything died around about us. It wasn't just me that lost my ship, but I was so angry because I had worked for that, and this is before Plex and Alpha and all of that jazz, so it was months of in-game stuff, possibly over years. But when I got it, I was so happy with it, and I was flying something that I couldn't afford to lose, so when I lost it, I was so gutted. But that's something that it's a good sort of insurance against it. Now, the last thing is the most common thing, and I see this comment more than anything else, and it's when somebody is talking about how the devs hate the players. And again, never assume malevolence when idiocy will explain what's going on. That is to say that most people don't make malevolent decisions, don't make hateful decisions. They are making a decision with the experience they've got. The experience they've got might not be the same as everybody else's. It definitely won't be the same as everybody else's, even in the same job. And especially when it comes to somebody that's done that job for a while, they would consider themselves an expert, understandably so. The problem is that they have a perspective, and their perspective is somebody who doesn't play the game full time. They develop the game full time. That's very different. If you can jump into the game for the Friday night roam and you spawn in all the stuff that you're going to use, that's not the same experience as somebody who's taken 6 months to build up to those shiny things and then gone out and had that experience. It's not the same experience that a YouTuber who is making money from YouTube and buys Plex has. They haven't put all that money into it to understand what's going on. There is that disconnect between everybody. We all have different experiences of it. And especially when it comes to the smaller solo or small gang PvP, the devs don't have that experience. So they don't care about that because it's not what they see. They see the loudest player group. And they're not shitting on the solos, they're just not thinking about them. They're not shitting on the wormholers, they're just not thinking about them. They are thinking about the high sec guys because they are the loudest group. They are the group that's the PvP. And while some particular devs have that sort of focus there because they assume that the entire game should be PvP, that's just something that is wrong. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. If you've got statistics that show, even within EVE, as well as all other MMOs, that 80% of a player base doesn't engage in PvP, and that 80% of a player base, not the same 80%, but another calculation shows that 80% of the player base stays in high sec, well then that shows you that the vast majority of your players are non-combative. So when you're constantly making things to drive combat, that it's just stupidity. A good way of putting it would be actually saying that it's survivorship bias. For those of you that don't know, survivorship bias is this sort of logical example where a whole load of bomber planes were coming back from Germany and they had holes all over the wings for where they had been shot up in the Second World War. And a whole load of people looked at those holes and said, there's holes all over the place, we need to patch those holes, we need to make those areas stronger. Until somebody came along and went, no, those are the planes that came back, so those are the holes that can be punched through the plane and not be a problem. We need to armour the places that have not been shot, because a shot to there is what kills it. And that's kind of what's going on with the EVE developers. Their focus is the loudest group of the player base, but the largest group of the player base is not getting the attention. And the largest group in this case, I'm talking about several groups. I'm talking about the people in wormhole space. I'm talking about the PvE guys, because PvE is the biggest driver in the game. It actually accounts for a lot of the losses in the game. But when the developers come out, it's PvP. It is, we are making these new mining things which will drive PvP. We are making these new areas, these new encounters in nullsec, because that's where the PvP is. We are going to turn several areas of high sec into null sec, into abyssal space, so that we can drive PvP. We are going to make it so that some of the faction warfare comes into high sec, and occasionally systems turn into low sec or null sec for PvP. That's the survivorship bias. When they're doing that, they're ignoring the 80% of the people in the game that want to build stuff. They want to create, not destroy. And this is the vast majority of humanity, even outside of the game. Creation is what drives us forwards. Destruction is the smaller group. So if you're focusing your game on the destruction, which is why in some articles you will see EVE Online referred to as the bastard sandbox, then that's going to sort of affect who's willing to join the game, because you're already limiting 80% of humanity that doesn't see fighting as the primary thing. So that's sort of my 2 cents on that, especially when it comes to that. A lot of people put down those comments that the developers are malevolent in what they are doing, that they hate the player base, that they just don't give a shit. They absolutely do, they just don't see it. And that's kind of what drives my channel, is I'd like people to see it. And sort of being recognised, having my channel recognised by a few people in streams and things like that, has actually sort of, well, emboldened me to put out more of these opinions, because you don't even need to say it loud enough. You just need to say it often enough and people will start listening. And it's not that you should go out there and shout it. You shouldn't be angry. You should try and put the points along. when my videos are running as long as they are at over 44 minutes, it's because I'm trying to put in not just what I think, but the justifications, the reasons behind it, because I think that those are essential to understanding. I very much dislike it when people put out their opinion based on fact, but they never mention the fact. Or they put out, well, this is the reason that this guy was wrong all along, but then they never actually talk about how he was wrong, and the one example has no evidence to it. That really irritates me, because I think if you want to say something, you should give your reasoning, you should give your evidence. So with all that being said, down below I'm going to put in the links for everything. The MTN, I'll also link the rock paper shotgun and any of the other articles that I've seen for it, just so that you've got the sort of opinion pieces. I'm also, the very first link, as I said, is going to be the video from Billar on the RuneScape thing, because a couple of people asked about that, and I think his video of everything that's online is actually the best example of everything. Yeah, you're going to get stuck with an advert for grind news, but yeah, just skip through it. And as per usual, something I always appreciate is comments. Love them or hate them, just be nice in the way that you put it. I don't mind you telling me that you don't like the video, that's absolutely fine. And it helps, because somebody's comment about not liking my previous video is the reason I wanted to explain in more clarity a lot of the stuff in this video, just so that everybody's got all of the information going forward, well, at least all the information I have. I would like to do more content like that, and criticism is as much of an improvement as critique, as nice comments. So if you have something to say, I'm always happy to hear it. Please put it down in the doobly-doo down below. Be nice to each other. That's always a thing I think we should always attempt to do. And always be aware that some people can take things wrong. I would say watch the tone of your writing, because I had this very recently where I made a joke and somebody thought I was being offensive, and it was just because there's no tone in text. So it's always good to check your stuff. I personally, as I've mentioned before, I'm ADHD, and there's a thing called emotional dysregulation. I call it emotional overreaction, but it's where somebody might say something slightly negative, like an honest critique, and your head can hear it as you are a failure or some crap like this. I have to deal with this with a few members of my family that have this emotional overreaction, and I used to have it, well, I still have it, it's part of me, but I've learned to deal with it more. But it makes me aware of how I talk to other people, especially online, where there is very little context and no social cues around about what we're saying. So it's something I think is good to put out there and put forward. But as usual, if you have enjoyed this, if you have disliked this, please leave a comment and all that jazz down below. Likes and dislikes are all fine, and yeah, I have a look at them occasionally. I don't actually know where to find the dislikes these days, but that's perfectly fine as well. With that all being said, have a look at the stuff down below. I think it's always a good idea to read on the stuff, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Jesus! Fuck me!